Welcome to our fellowship today, and I just asked Larissa to give a brief report on what happened at the live streaming with Barnabas Fund the other night. Thanks, Larissa.
Across 63 countries. So some of the projects were like helping with schooling for Christian kids. I think that struck out to me was those two little boys from Pakistan. Yeah. One that had, we have access to so much here in the West, and parents can have choices about where they send their kids to school. But in Pakistan, there was one little chap who had to go to a public school, which was basically a Muslim-based school, and he's been picked on. Wasn't thriving at all, and being able to get to a Christian school, he's thriving better. And most of those Christian kids come from homes where their families are down the bottom of the run. They're doing the lowest paid jobs. Sanitary workers, things like that, and so their kids can be denied opportunities. So that one really sort of touched my heart, and to sort of think that, the difficulties that they face there. There's also the one about bricking workers being, that also hit home a bit too. How families can get enslaved to that if, we can look back about our jobs and think that, we've got it tough. Imagine getting barely living wage, and then say the crisis comes up, health or something like that, and go to your boss and they'll loan it to you, no worries, but they won't loan a huge interest rate. And then having to work that off. And where there were some families that the debt would just pass down from generation to generation. So that one was really interesting, how Barnabas Fund would earmark funds to go to that. And then, there was, and Caroline Kerslake went through the different projects that they were doing, but I was interested in what Patrick Sugdale had to say about post-COVID, and 10 things I only got down about 5 of them, and then it's interesting to see about how they're going to change how Barnabas will operate, and I thought that will really need a lot of prayer. Because one of the 5 things that he's expecting after the post-COVID world, the new normal, that there'll be growing global persecution across the world, and interacting disasters. Once again, like they've had their locusts, they've had floods, they've had corona, and so he's assuming or sort of predicting that there'll be a lot more of that across the world. I mean, I understand there's been some floods over in Sydney and different things, and Australia's known a lot of weather extremes in this past year. So he's seeing that will happen a bit more, and increasing anti-Christian violence. And mainly he's speaking militant Islams and militant Hindus. And of course, those people are also around the Western civilization too. There's also you've got your Black Lives Matter, your Antifa, and so the West is not immune from it too. We have a different side of it, but there is increasing anti-Christian things. And he's also saying reduction in religious liberty. They say that in a crisis, and it's right and wrong, that government will sort of look at protecting its people, but are they ready to relinquish that? And I think that's what's going to hit us in the West a bit. We can talk about China, we can talk about India. They track and trace their people, in surveillance, and I know we've seen through the UK that there's a camera on every street corner, so it's amazing the police still can't track down how crimes happen. But if they were to really switch their mind, they can track and trace anybody and even in Australia, it's going to be amazing. The things that they've grabbed hold of, are they prepared to roll those back? Or else, yes, it will be interesting, because I think that we will find there'll be some different changes to the law that will actually impact on us, just like even people getting together in churches, and the distancing and things like that. They're also saying that there'll be a lot more impact on the widow and the fatherless. And so seeing that there'll be a lot more. Then they're looking at investing in hope as their new way of sort of looking at moving. And it's interesting, I don't really pick up with some of the questions. I actually thought the final question in the question and answer segment was really, really interesting and important, where a person asked, like, how do you get the money to the places? And how do you make sure that it goes to where it needs to go? And how the banking standards around the world, like in Syria, they can no longer go in there because of America putting sanctions on the Syrians. And with all the different tightening up of banking regulations around the world, making sure that money doesn't end up in the hands of terrorists. Well, anybody can name anybody a terrorist now, so it's interesting, like some Christian groups can end up being defined as terrorists. So it's interesting how to get the funds required to people. And they're really looking at that people should be self-propagating and self-funding. And so part of their thrust of the investing in hope is really equipping those that are on the ground to be able to feed themselves, to be able to fund themselves. And they're looking at investing in Christian leadership, and they're looking at putting a new website together, and with the Christian resources out there in various different languages. And I think it's one thing that you said, Dad, was what are those resources going to look like? How they're going to support biblical teaching. They're looking at investing in the next generation, like the young people, with schooling and with vocational training to help them so that they can earn money and in their countries. Also livelihoods, so once again, similar to that vocational training, but looking at people being able to sort of fund themselves. Also looking at healthcare, and I thought it was interesting. It wasn't just your physical care, but psychiatric care, mental health. They were really interested in on that, honing in on that. And I thought, well, that's going to be interesting, but where they or how they were sourced to support that, because there are certainly some mental health needs out there. Also looking at the spiritual life in the church, and also practical care for the vulnerable, whether it be the elderly, whether it be kids, whether it be those vulnerable Christians that are a very minute minority. And so those were some things that I picked up from it. But it's amazing, it was very good how they identified that they only take 12% for their administration costs. 18%. Which I think is great. Yeah. 18%. Because I thought they had 88% going out to. No, 18. So 18% going out. And I thought that was very good. And so they've got different projects. If you go to the Barnabas Fund website, that people can fund directly. And I liked it, which sets them apart from any other non-government organisation. As Rosemary or Carolyn and Patrick Secretary said, it really is going to the Christians, to them on the ground. And there's lots of good organisations out there, but they've done all and sundry. But in this one, it's really targeting the Christians in those countries, and how you call them that have Macedonian Christians help with supporting Jerusalem. So I thought that's very good. And it was touching to see all those pastors and different people around the world that said thank you. That was, it's nice to have some faces and names, and to keep in mind when you're praying for it. But one of the things I thought was, I'm not sure about their new direction, but to pray that God will guide them. Because I thought whenever there's change, there's always a chance for the enemy to come in and put something in the mix there that might not be glorifying to God, that can show up later. So,
that's good. They kept to their vision right from the beginning. They were ministers of the persecuted church. And they kept to that.
And it's amazing, like they just distribute the funds to the people on the ground to get the goods and things like that.
Yeah.
And we sort of chatting afterwards, after the broadcast, and thinking how different it was for Brother Andrew. I was thinking, like in Syria, if you're a Christian there, and you know, if you're calling out for help, like they had so many requests coming to Barnabas, and they have such an in-depth way of being able to try and determine that it is not, they're not being defrauded, that it is a real need. I was thinking, if you're a Syrian Christian, you really would want, it would be a miracle how God could supply your needs. And that's very humbling, and how the West, like, we don't know what it is to go without.
And that's the big thing that I can see from that program, was that a lot of those pastors over there are living in that place where locusts and coronavirus, where people have to choose hunger or health. And consequently, they're looking at how the West has given so much of the teachings over there, particularly in Uganda and places like that, where they've been taught how to grow a big church. But I'll be interested in what the pastors in those affected areas have got to teach us concerning how they cope with the depressed sort of conditions of people. You know,
we do a lot of teaching via Zoom and the social platforms, but I thought, what happens, like, you know, Mark Zuckerberg or Twitter's had a bit of a hack in, but if they decided to shut down those platforms, you know, how would those pastors and that be taught? How would they access resources? And you're thinking how privileged we are to have a Bible in, you know, in written form that we can access.
So I phoned up Ashley Saunders after the thing, and he contacted me on Friday. So I'm looking at you know, working with him to actually promote it through our area, you know, the needs that they do have. Because I found that with Gospel for Asia, we were led down the wrong path there in that, and so I'm working closely with Ashley Saunders right now. He sent out some stuff, so I'm just going to go through it now and look at how it goes, because I think the critical thing now is how are they going to operate? Who's going to do the teaching to the pastors over there? What's the material? I was glad they were talking about Indian pastors and African pastors that are preparing learning materials now, rather than relying on America or England or Australia to provide them with the teachings that they
need. They're the best to reach their people. And I think the danger has been that the West has wanted to westernise them and mucking them up with. But where we need the gospel, they need to know how to minister to their people. They don't need the Western style coming in, because it's not in the mark, really, with them, not in their country. That's what I think we like the Gospel for Asia starting with, was that they were going to train the nationals to reach their own people. And I thought, isn't that better than sending over a lot of people that they've got to support, that it costs big money to have missionaries over there.
Particularly Western missionaries.
Yeah, because they want to live, the Americans, they want to live on the pig's back. You know, they don't want to have to live in a little hut or something, you know. But yes, it does cost. And that's what was really good with them until they started to.
Behold what manner of love the Father has given unto us. Behold what manner of love the Father has given unto us. That we should be called the sons of God. That we should be called the sons of God. Behold what manner of love the Father has given unto us. Behold what manner of love the Father has given unto
111.
Oh, here is that.
Hurry up, go for it. No, you
Followed
go.
by 115. Under, is it?
111 followed by 115. Good one.
Oh, yeah, ancient words.
Jesus is alive.
Hallelujah.
Jesus is alive. His is the blood that ransomed me. His is the power that keeps me free. His risen life He's given to me. For Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive.
Hallelujah.
Jesus is alive. His is the blood that ransomed me. His is the power that keeps me free. His risen life He's given to me. For Jesus is alive. 115?
Just over the page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Holy words, long preserved for our Lord in this world. They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Words of life and words of hope, give us strength, help us cope in this world wherever we roam. Ancient words will guide us home. Ancient words, ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Words of life and words of hope, give us strength, help us cope in this world wherever we roam. Ancient words will guide us home. Ancient words, ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart.
Here's an excerpt from the diary of Jim Elliot, just before we come to the word.
Our dreams are tawdry, showy, but cheap and of poor quality when they are compared to the leading of God. They are not worthy of the aura of wonder we usually surround them with. God only doeth wonders. His hand can work nothing less. In my own experience, I have found that the most extravagant dreams of boyhood have not surpassed the great experience of being in God's will. I believe that nothing could be better. His will is always a bigger thing than we bargain for. But we must believe that whatever it involves, it is good, acceptable, and perfect. Father, let me loose my clutch on everything temporal, my life, my possessions. Lord, help me release the tension of my grasping hand. Open it as Christ's was opened to receive the nail of Calvary, that I might be unleashed from all that binds me. God, saturate me with the oil of the Spirit, that I may be a flame. I seek not a long life, but a full one like you, Lord Jesus. Surely those who know the great compassionate heart of God must deny their own loves to share in the expression of his. Compelled by his call from the throne above, from those round about, and even from the damned souls below, I dare not stay home while others perish. It makes me boil when I think of the power we profess and the utter impotency of our action. We are spiritual pacifists in this battle to the death with principalities and powers in high places. American believers have sold their lives to the service of mammon, and the tombs themselves are not fuller than our well-fed churches. Their condemnation is written in the dust on their Bible covers. We are content to sit by and leave the enemies of God unchallenged. Young men are going into professional fields because they don't feel called. We don't need a call. We need a kick in the pants. We need a stirring. May God send us forth. Because he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep, to gain that which he cannot lose. I pray that the Lord will give you a hallowed daredevil spirit, and lifting the sword of truth, consuming you with a passion that is called by the cultured citizen of Christendom fanaticism, but known to God as that saintly madness that led his son through bloody sweat and hot tears to glory. How long dare we go on without passion and love? Not long, I pray, Lord Jesus, not long.
It'll be a different feeling here today. Next Sunday we'll have Robin and Trevor with us. We had a whole group of Satanists around us. There were 10 of them, and it was so wonderful to see how God's people can work together. Because this ones here had their hair done up in all sort of spots all around, like they do, had all the makeup on that was designed to sort of impress around. And like I said, there were 10 of them there. There was one lad there that was trying to outdo all the others. But I was impressed with Megan because she said, Lord, show me the way you see them. And he did. And it was so good to have that place where she was being stretched but also ministered to at that point. But it sort of started off with the area, because you're dealing with people that are enjoying their sin. Massive. These are young people. All sorts of things that were happening, but the wonderful thing was that it made me realise the cost of sin and the message we can give to those who have paid the cost of sin. And so Luke chapter 14 verses 26 to 23. And this is the basis of where I'm at. Look, I've learned so much over the last week, particularly in relation to where people are coming from, wanting to do something for the Lord. And it's just been a broad-ranging week. So Luke 14, 26 to 33. If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, look at the disciple, he cannot be my disciple. See, this is where the first commandment, you must love the Lord your God first. Always. Nothing must come between you and your God. Nothing must come between him who made us and loved us. That was the trouble with Adam and Eve in the first place, because they loved the lie of the devil rather than the love for God. And so it says, it sounds awkward, doesn't it? But that was the challenge that Jesus put to them. If any man come to me and hate not his father, mother, and wife,
and children, and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me, he cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, sits not down first and counts the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Lest haply after he hath laid the foundation, and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going to make war against another king sits not down first and consults whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends an embassage and desirous conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever be of you that forsakes not all that he had, he cannot be my disciple. That's pretty strong conditions there, isn't it? If you're going to follow the Lord, then there is these issues here that he covers in just a few verses. So there is a cost. And what he's saying is that you sit down and you weigh up the cost. If you're going to do something, if you're going to follow Christ, you weigh up the cost. This is where the sign we used on Friday night, you have a choice. Follow Jesus, God's living word, or receive the wages of sin, death. Which will you choose? Now, interestingly enough, the focus is not on you have a choice, follow Jesus. They came out, this is what drew the Satanists to us. They wanted to really come back to us and say, hey, the wages of sin, the wages of sin. Tell me the wages of sin. And we could go through some areas there. But I thought it'd be worthwhile today for us to know the cost of sin. The cost that is there. Because if we see the cost of sin, but we also see the beauty of what it is that we are to have the ability to follow Jesus, God's living word. And this is his living word to us today. In Luke 4, so many people feel that they can just still have that bit both ways. They don't have to live fully for Jesus, just 90% of the time, 5% of the time, or they'll decide how much it is. But how much, if we look at it, I've looked at this since I came home. What's the cost of sin? The sin of pride. Isaiah 14, 12 to 16. You don't need to look it up, you can copy the scriptures down if you want. But Lucifer, the sin of pride. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend unto heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sight of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. This is the same lie he told Adam and Eve. I will be like the Most High. You will be like God. You will be as God. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the side of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, This is the man that made the earth to tremble and did shake the kingdoms. What's the cost of pride? A life in heaven, you forfeit that, and an eternity in hell. And the devil, Revelation 20:10, and the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. That's the cost. The devil exalted himself even up to the place where he believed he would become like God himself. With the sin of Adam and Eve, the cost of that, they believed the lie of Satan, they would become as God. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in that day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. What was the cost of that sin? Loss of fellowship with God and a sentence of death on the offspring which we have today. every one of us has the effect of that. We don't know what it would have been like to have that fellowship with God as Adam and Eve had. But we know what it's like when we come back to him through Jesus. We know what it is. Romans 5:12 is the scripture there. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered the world, and death by sin, and death passed upon all men, for all have sinned. One thing I realised is that the cost to the animals, the cost of sin of Adam and Eve to the animals, God killed some animals so that he could clothe Adam and Eve. You know, they had fig leaves. They had leaves that they put together, but God had to kill an animal. And with that, in Genesis 3:21, it says, unto Adam and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothe them. Not only those what happened in the beginning, but I think of individuals who've experienced the cost of sin. Look at Egel. Innocent man, doing what God wants, gets killed. His blood cries out to God. David, Bathsheba, Peter, the apostle, Herod. But we find there that the cost of sin doesn't just sort of instantly pay. You know, Adam lived for 900 years over into that range. So it wasn't like the moment you do this, you're going to die. It's like over 900. We've seen with the Amos, with Edom, and with those sort of areas that God is slow in his judgment, but he is sure. And that is what God shows in his word. We find in James 1:13 to 15, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempts he any man. But every man that is tempted, when he is drawn away by his own lust. Now this is what I saw with those 10 people there. They enjoyed their sin. They enjoyed it. They were saying, look, you talk about the wages of sin, but we're enjoying our life now. They're about 18 through to 25, these people around. We really enjoy it. And one guy quotes the Bible to me. He said, doesn't the Bible say you've got to love your neighbour? Well, when I go home tonight, I'm going to sleep with my boyfriend and love my neighbour. So this is what they're saying. And I said, with that there, it was so thick in one way, but the Lord was with us mightily. And I said, you're going to grow old one day. You're going to weary of this. You're going to come to that place where no one is going to be around there, that you're going to enjoy being with. And you're going to have this wretched sort of feeling of being alone, and then you'll be in desperate need, and the only thing that will able to help you at that time will be if you call upon Jesus, and we can call that out in the Lord. Now that is the hope that we have to give. That's the powerful message that we have to give to a generation out there. Oh, there are so many things that they have learned and so many things that they have picked up, but they haven't learned the things that are going to give life. They'll say, oh, no one's going to call us for our sin. It's not important what you're saying. It's really just a place where you're just, what one of them said, don't you realise that this is used to control people? Control people? You're being controlled now by your lusts, by the fact that you have been led away down this path. And the lust that you feel now will only be a pleasure for a moment. I think of Moses when he fled Egypt. And he said, it said in Hebrews, isn't it, that he forsook the pleasure of sin for a season. He didn't engage in that because that season of sin soon fades. It soon fades. And then at the end of that life, I find that there are people that are alone, and the only way they have to call out, if they have heard a way of escape, is through Jesus Christ. And that's what I found with them. And so it was good. It was like Mary Fraser. She said to one of these with this white hair up there, she said, "Can I touch your hair?" She said, "Oh yeah, don't get me wrong, they weren't arrogant, they weren't shouting us down, they were quite civil." And this was a really, really wonderful thing that was happening. She could, "Can I touch your hair?" And it was this, it was all over the place. And she said, "Look, it's so soft." But she said, "Can I ask you a question? How do you sleep?" It's all over, this way and that way and that way. She said, "But maybe you'd like this track." And she took it. And it's the track that Trevor has developed. God makes his enemies smile. And that took him around a lot. She took it around to the other people there and said, "See, God makes his enemies smile." And she was just sharing it there with each one of them. So the message went out in so many different ways because there was a team of people there that had compassion. And that was the thing that Megan got. She said, "These are lost souls." You know, and then they left after about a quarter of an hour. We had a great time with them in that aspect. But there was another group of young lads that were just standing that had been listening to this whole thing. And they came up to us and said, "Yeah, they're all going to hell. You know, why worry about them? They're all going to hell." But you know, there was a different thing from our group that was around there because there was a deep compassion for these young people that somehow that you could have that tangible area where you know God was wanting to reach out to them. So you can see that the lust that they had produced over time, that they've been taught with this quiet group, it does conceive. It brings forth sin, and sin when it is finished brings forth death. Unless we can get another message to them. The cost of sin, look at Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 19:24. The Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah. All nations in the flood, they experienced the cost of sin with Noah. Israel, Judah, Babylon, all of these experienced the cost of sin, Sodom and Gomorrah. Sin costs us our freedom. Sin costs us our peace. Sin costs having God not guide and direct one's life, because sin can break our fellowship with God. We may not have His directing our lives. Acts 5:32, He gives the Holy Spirit to those who obey Him. If you don't obey Him, then you've lost that direction that He can give you each day. And eventually sin will cost the existence of the earth. Revelation 21:1, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. So this earth is groaning right now, and I can see that all creation groans, waiting for that day when God fulfills that word. But the beauty of also the cost of sin is it cost Jesus his life. Now that's the power that we can share with other people when it comes down to the place where they are without hope. We can say that He died for all. 2 Corinthians 5:15. He died for all, and that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto Him which died for them and rose again. One of the young lads there, he was saying, look, I know your God forgives. I know that He says Now, I can go ahead and do something today. He would be about 18, 19, the guy. He says, I can do it. Now, you telling me that I can say, God, forgive me, and then I can go and do it tomorrow, because I'm free to do that. I said, look, if you really have been forgiven, you will not want it. I said, a baby that is a baby, you expect to dirty their nappy. But a man at 50 years old, you don't expect him to be still dirty in their nappy. You don't expect him to be wearing a nappy. And Gerald was certain now, he says, but your God forgives. Surely, if he loves me, he'll forgive me, even if I go ahead and do the things that I want to do, even though I've been forgiven for it today. But I said, you don't get the same thing, you don't commit the same thing. I said, they were saying, then they utilised that thing of saying, well, what do you say about homosexuals? They want to divert the subject of it. What do you say about this? What do you say about that? I said, well, what do you say? Is that wrong? Do you know whether that's wrong or not? So I said, okay, the person gets raped. A person is raped by a man. Do you think the man should be punished? And I said, oh yes, definitely. Why? Don't you think he should be? No, why do you think he should be punished? Because that person's been violated. I said, well, don't you see where God has been violated, or we don't obey what he said? But maybe that's too much for you today. But at the same time, there's a sense of, well, this is justice that we want. And, but we get the point. The great thing is that with all the sin in the world, and no one person is exactly the same as the next person in relation. We've all sinned. We've all taken out, some big, some small. We perhaps haven't done the things that David has done, or Bathsheba, or anyone that you can think of along the way, but we're not to compare ourselves with that. We're to come humbly before a holy God who comes back to us and says, if you only humble yourself, the sin of pride is the one that keeps people from the living God. And when we humble ourselves before God and accept his forgiveness, it's humbling to say that I've done this. It's very often the good people that think they're so good that they don't need God, they're the ones in most need. And like these lads that were after them, we've had to pray just as much for them as for those that we were engaging with. And but the cost of sin, I think, as Lucy has prayed today, we need to lift up Jesus more and more. More and more. We need to lift him up as the one who is able to meet the greatest needs of our life, the sin that we've had that has covered us and broken our relationship with God, so that with Jesus we're coming into the place where he is God's living word, and we do have a choice to have fellowship with him. But remember what he says, Luke 14. If you love something else besides him, first, this is where we need to have those priorities very clearly. Because what you believe is going to affect what you think. What you think is going to affect what you feel. What you feel is going to affect what you do. And out of that believing, so as we get out there, as we really stand up and take up our cross, take up the people, this is the difficulty that I see that Barnabas Fund has had with the churches over in the African, Indian, and those other Asian countries, where they are suffering huge, big time now, because they don't have the comforts we have here. They don't have that. I mean, it's real. That one where you've got that blind person
that old lady
with a grandchild leading her to get the parcel. Yeah. Now that is, totally, it's hard to grasp. It's hard to figure that this is what they would have woken up this morning, not like us, in a nice, comfortable environment, and that they would have been taken to and get food. To think about that is something which I believe that we need to repair some of that stuff that has been taught those people in that country, where you can have a big church if you follow our Western way of doing church. It's going to be a time where God will call us to really choose to follow what He has called us to do. Giving sacrificially, that be a way where we can move something with Barnabas. But I'm looking very carefully, because if they are constrained so much by what the legislation, banking legislation is across the countries, we need to work very carefully ourselves. Because if something is as tender as that, like if they can't get into a country, can't send money to a country, because of, say, like Syria, the Americans are preventing any help going into Syria and all. Yeah, but it's that time that this is an age where you want to give as best you can, but you've got to be very discriminating. People are being ripped off by scams big time in Australia, and so the same thing is how best we can go. But God will lead us. He'll give us opportunities. He'll give us those things that He's bigger than anything that we can think of. So yeah, that's where I'm at today. And I trust that we're a small group, but at the same time, God doesn't need many. He just needs one or two to obey His word and follow Him with all their heart. And I'm looking at Haggai, starting Haggai this coming week with the David Pawson ones that we'll be doing. We'll meet together on the Tuesday, and we went through it today. It's very worthwhile. It's very timely. They're saying Zechariah is the one to do after Haggai too. I've gone through Zechariah, and it's several stretches. Oh, sure, communion.